So in this third part, I wanted to start off by going back to pages 46 and 47. And I'm going to try to say out loud, and I'm also going to go to page 49 because there's they go back inside the tower, and she once again sees the words of the writing on the wall. And again, what's very interesting is that when she goes in this time, there's a lot more information than there was before. So what on earth happened? Apparently, whatever is in there has been writing things like crazy since she last left. So let's read the whole thing here. Where lies the strangling fruit that came from the hand of the sinner? I shall bring forth the seeds of the dead to share with the worms that gather in the darkness and surround the world with the power of their lives, while from the dim-lit halls of other places, forms that never could be right for the impatience of the few who have never seen or been seen. And I think the only other one is, why should I rest when wickedness exists in the world? God's love shines on anyone who understands the limits of endurance and allows forgiveness, chosen for the service of a higher power. In the black water, with the shining sun at midnight, those fruit shall come ripe, and in the darkness of that which is golden shall split open to reveal the revelation of the fatal softness in the earth. Okay, well, that's a lot of gobbledygook. But the idea is that whatever this is certainly growing. It's evolving in the way that she is adapting and becoming familiar with this place. It's already changing itself. And as we find out, they're not writing this. Whatever creature is writing this, it's not writing it with a pen. What it is it's creating creatures to mimic the language, right? And this is the first mention of God. This is the first mention of this sort of religious style. It has a lot of connotations to what is called the Book of Revelations, or the end of times, right? So it sort of mimics that sort of language. So that's very interesting. Okay. Like she says, at first they were merely words, and that was enough. But it keeps going, right? And what happens is there's a sense of unease in ignoring the ominous quality of those words. So the sense of unease is always a reference to the uncanny. There's an uncanny feeling in ignoring the ominous or spooky quality of these words, and it was palpable. You could feel it, you could taste it. It infected our own sentences when we spoke. They might repeat some of these words and not even realize it. As we tried to catalog and write down the biological reality of what we were both seeing, so they can see things on the wall, but she can actually see the writing, whereas the others cannot. Okay. And then we're going to kind of skip through all this here. But I want to go to page 49 because she says something that is very important. And this is halfway down page 49. Very, very important. I felt a surge of irritation, but it wasn't directed at the surveyor. I had the wrong brain for the task, and so did she. So remember what we were saying earlier. A surveyor can see and make judgment calls, right, on the surface. The biologist can often see what others cannot see, the sort of fine print like a lawyer. However, what they needed was a linguist. Remember, she said earlier, at the time when the linguist was the only one that didn't show up, that's when she thought she was the least useful. Now we find out she is the most useful, that she could probably break through the code of this, maybe. And she says, eventually, though, I was able to reconstruct fragments of a handful of some of the variations. If the main thread formed a kind of dark, incomprehensible sermon, then the fragments shared an affinity with that purpose with a heightened syntax. In other words, um, she's trying to recreate this as best she can and trying to put it together, even though they're spatially different, right? It's all over the place, and she's trying to make sense of the words and trying to put it in the paragraphs, which is why when I looked at it, I was also confused. And then after the last part, in the black water with the sign shining at midnight on page 50, she says, "These words defeated me somehow. I took samples as we went, but half-heartedly, only because she knows this is not going to mean anything, right? Biologically, she's never going to be able to figure it out. If she looks at it under a microscope, it's not going to reveal anything." She says, "Sometimes you get a sense of when truth of things will not be revealed by microscopes." Soon, too, the sound of the heartbeat through the walls became so loud I stopped to put in earplugs to muffle the beat. Be masked. Half deaf for different reasons, we continued our descent. And then she says, "It should have been me who noticed the change, the transitional environment, not her." But an hour after downward progress, I'm not sure how she's judging 1 hour, the surveyor stopped on the steps before me. "Do you think the words on the wall are becoming fresher?" Fresher? More recent. I just stared at her for a moment. I had become acclimated to the situation. Again, she's fully adapted. Had done my best to pretend to be the kind of impartial observer. Notice that she says, had done my best to pretend to be an observer. So even in this case, she doesn't see herself as an observer. But she is, right? She is the observer. "Turn off your light?" The surveyor hesitated. The truth was, I had purposely left my gun in its belt holster, and could have extinguished me in any moment. So, the premonition of violence made little rational sense. And yet, it came to me too easily, almost as if placed in my mind by outside forces. So, this is where we see again an issue of control and an issue of who is really controlling the biologist's thinking. Is it herself? Has the psychologist already trained her to do things in case if something like this happens? Or is her body, which has been stuck with this sort of new spores, is that what's causing this? So we got three different forces that could be affecting the biologist's thinking. Either way, I don't think she likes it. I think she likes to be in control of the situation. And that's when she realizes that what the surveyor says is true. The word seems more active, the colors brighter, the strobing more intense than I remembered from levels above. In other words, it's whatever is there. That means it's either been making it freshly or that they're getting closer and closer to where this beast is. Whatever is inside this tower tunnel. The bright, wet slickness of the new. Standing there, and this is on page 51 towards the bottom, standing there in that impossible place, I said it before the surveyor could, to own it. Something below us is writing this script. Again, the word own is very important, right? She wants to have possession of power. She wants to be the one that recognizes it, not the surveyor. It should have been me. And then we turned our lights back on. I saw fear in her eyes, but also a strange determination. I have no idea what she saw in me. Okay, and then we're going to kind of skip through some of these parts here, because what they find on page 55 is the surveyor started cursing. At the time, we didn't think to look for more sets of boot prints. Why? Because what they're about to find is revealed somehow after she talks about her husband. I have no idea why she purposely skips on page 55. If you look here at page 55, She literally skips from there's something there with footprints, and I said, well, who is it? Then she talks about her time with her husband. I'm like, well, what does that have to do with it? But that's when we found out. That's when we find out. Excuse me, that the anthropologist has died, um, and it's not a pretty death either. It looks bad. There's something down there on page 59, and it turns out to be the anthropologist. And this is certainly not a good sign at all. And then on page 60, they finally say it. I saw the figure and shone my helmet light on it. If I'd hesitated a second longer, I never would have had the nerve. It was the body of the anthropologist. Dun 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 dun. So something is going on, and further down she says, okay, it's clear. The psychologist lied to us. And suddenly, the pressure of her presence far above, guarding the entrance, was pressing down on me in an intolerable way. Oh my God, I let her slip. I knew it. I should have known. It was her. Something must have happened. The question is, what has happened? But it looks like whatever affected the anthropologist was not the psychologist. The psychologist did not attack her. How do we know this? It's revealed that she's got a kind of phosphorescent glow, which means whatever is creating the words on the wall most likely attacked her. And on page 61, her black box was crushed, and she had odd burn marks, which is very odd. And so all I could say was, I don't know what happened. A kind of witness to our own ignorance or incompetence, or both. And then here's more of the quote: the shadows of the abyss, that is, things below in the dark, are like the petals of a monstrous flower. That means a huge flower that will bloom or blossom within the brain or the skull and expand the mind beyond what any man can bear. And in this case, I think the interpretation of that is that what's ever inside of the shadow, once it tries to tell you the truth, it burns through you and something bad happens to you. What a shame. Poor anthropologist. So, she says, I think she interrupted the creator of the script on the wall. And it did that to her? She was pleading with me for some other explanation. I didn't have one, so I didn't reply. I just went back to observing as she stood there watching me. Now, I like this thing on page 62. She says, a biologist is not a detective, but I began to think like a detective, automatically talking about adaptation. If you want to talk about adaptation, it's right there. She knows she's not a detective, but you know what? She's going to darn do her best to try to be like one. First of all, the thing, and no matter what the surveyor might hope, I could not think of it as human, had clearly turned into frenzy. In other words, it did pretty much a lot of physical damage to the poor anthropologist. The boot prints in the middle of the swirl were indeed from the anthropologist, and I could follow partial imprints back to the right side. So she starts to imagine in her mind what it must have been like for the anthropologist and what she did overnight, right? And then she finds more footprints, which could very much be the psychologist, which was probably with her, who probably ran, but before she ran, she probably fell, slipped, or the thing might have grabbed her leg, right? Because she was nursing her sort of right leg for a reason. Now, on page 63, she says something very important. Was it pity or empathy that I felt for the anthropologist? Weak? Trapped with no choice. And there it is again, very explicit, right? Choice is again another issue. So if you're going to talk about the theme of choice in this novel, chapter 2 is a very good one to get a quote from. And this is where the biologist kind of reveals to the surveyor that whatever happened um, in the past, she's finally revealing to the surveyor, hey, we've actually been controlled in ways that you couldn't even imagine. And the Of course, the surveyor asks, well, why wouldn't you say that earlier? And it's because she said she had to be masked, right? But now, when they go up, that's when they find out on page 65 and in other places that the psychologist is gone. And because the psychologist is gone, it freaks them out. And as she says at the end of page 67, by the time we were ready to cross the border, we knew everything and we knew nothing. So, lots of things going on here, right? This chapter is a little bit long, so I'm just going to stop here and then maybe take another break on this one to talk about what happens afterwards and the sort of lies of Area X that she's starting to find out now. And she will reveal to you, the reader, what the lies of Area X are. And this is only the first of many things that she finds out they have lied to her about. Okay, see you in the next video.